Welcome once again to the DRH show. Today I'm joined by a writer and a poet, Hugh Venables. Thanks for joining me.
Hi, Dennis. Really nice to see you.
Well, it's great to have you here, Hugh, and thanks for accepting my invitation to join me here in the DRH show. But just give us a background, your trajectory in life, and how you ended up being a writer, doing what you're doing.
Right. Okay. Yeah. I mean, that's always an interesting question to start with. Who are you? And of course, it's the biggest question there is. So I'll just try and answer it in relation to what we're going to chat about today. And that is that my name's Hugh Venables. I'm now 68, and I've made my living primarily writing as a communicator. Originally, I was a copywriter for an advertising agency at a time when the idea of PR, public relations, in the business-to-business world was just taking off. And they said, well, will you set up a business-to-business PR operation for us? And interestingly, what that turned out mostly to be was finding ways of explaining things that people who operated in silos knew about to people who didn't know what it was about. And this is why I was interested in meeting you, really, because I was so taken by your conversation that I think you were having with Dr. Naomi Murphy about the way that professions like to make life complicated. I think you've been tweeting about it recently, actually, about how psychologists like to wrap things in complicated words so that other people actually can't understand them, taking simple ideas and making them complicated. And I guess my life's work, my paid-for work, has been about ensuring that communication is clear. To pick up one of your phrases, you ought to be able to explain it to a 10-year-old, or you probably don't understand what it means. So I spent a life running a marketing communications consultancy, and retired initially in 2008, but then found myself going back to work because that idea of defining who you are once you stop working is quite difficult. He's Hugh Venables, the PR guy. Yeah, that's fine. But when he's not the PR guy, who is he? And that's where I come back to this interesting question you ask. Tell me a bit about yourself. Well, how do you define yourself once you take yourself outside work? And that, to me, is where this whole notion of communicating and writing comes in. I love the power of words, and words have this brilliant ability to enable you to understand within yourself who you are. So here I am, a guy who now has time to write what he wants to write for himself rather than what he had to write in order to earn a living. And that's when I kind of feel it's legitimate now to describe myself as a poet.
Yeah, we'll definitely talk more about what you do as a writer. But just to touch upon who you mentioned earlier, Naomi and Dave. Thanks for watching the previous interview I have with them. For the benefit of everyone who's watching this, I'll put the link to the description note. So if you want to see my interview with David and Naomi, you could just click the link. Yeah, I'm quite humbled that you actually check what I'm posting on Twitter. Yes, it was prompted by this week, as just for context, I'm a PhD student, so most of the time I'm actually spending my time not doing the DRH show, but actually writing my thesis. And when I write my thesis, I don't really write that way. I'm the person who writes the way I talk, and sometimes you can't really do that on thesis. So I was just thinking, is this really the process? You just make your point first, and then later you rewrite it just to obscure it, just to make it sound more academic. But ultimately, it's a game, I suppose. I chose to do a PhD, and that's the rule of the game. So I have to blend it. But going back to you, Hugh, you kind of suggested that words are actually the currency of communication, but I would imagine as a writer, you would describe words more than just a currency. So can you just tell us more about the power of words?
Yeah, I can. I mean, if I can first, let me just quickly nip back this idea you were talking about obscuring truth, preventing people who aren't within the clique from understanding things. I had an amazing example. It isn't only psychologists that do it. I used to work with lawyers, and trying to market lawyers in the olden days was really quite tricky. And I can remember we were having to do a presentation to a group of 70 lawyers, the partners in this big law firm, and we tested out with the marketing representatives from the panel about what we were going to say. And I said to these three guys who had set us up to talk to the whole team, I'm going to explain to them about marketing, but I am going to have to say to them that there's no magic here, that it's actually straightforward. And they looked at me in horror. They said, you can't tell them there's no magic. Use big words that they don't understand. Otherwise, they won't want to buy what you're selling. So it's not just psychologists who do it. Lawyers, and I think every profession, every industry has its own jargon that it likes to keep to, and it likes to believe that somehow it keeps it special. But yes, words and their power. We can very easily abuse them. Obvious words, you use them to communicate, but sometimes the ways in which we communicate, it can be wasteful, it can be cruel, it can be inaccurate, sometimes it's just unkind, and I just think that we need to pick them carefully, and we need to understand their power, and we need to use them to help heal, not just healing in relationships with others, but in that process of healing and understanding ourselves. So words, yes, it's the basic currency of communication. But if you use them really well, then the alchemy of words is that they can turn into just fabulous nuggets of gold when you put them together. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And of course, when we talk about writing, a lot of people keep journals, even, especially before the internet age, they keep a journal. And actually, I have a journal that I had since I was 9. I still have it to this day.
Wow.
And that I'm 40 now. And that actually what prompted me to, I love writing. I love keeping a journal, and that actually what prompted me to do my master's degree relating to the power of keeping a journal in relation to body dissatisfaction. That was like 10 years ago. But would you like to talk to us about journaling, and also just kind of give us a snapshot of what does it do? And I understand that you also did journaling yourself. So how and why did you get started with journal?
Yeah, I do journaling. I keep wanting to go back and ask you things, but I know you're supposed to be interviewing me. But
no, you can ask me something. It's a conversation.
I suppose what I know about you is that blogging has been your salvation. I didn't realize that you journaled before you blogged, and blogging obviously has meant a lot to you, and it's given you the chance to express yourself and share your views on things, and I guess help other people too, and create an audience of people that I guess hangs on your every word. But I suppose the thing about that is that you have to have built up sufficient confidence in what you have to say and your ability to express it, and the desire for other people to hear it, to go out blogging. And I guess there are lots of people who think, I might not have anything at all to say, but I might have something to say, but maybe nobody wants to hear it. And maybe I'm not very good at expressing it. And all of these fears that you have about putting yourself out there. Oh God, I'm going to be an imposter if I'm out there. People are going to think I'm daft. There is an answer to that. And of course, the answer to that is that you blog to one person. And that one person is you. And so your journal becomes your personal blog. You're the only reader of it, but it gives you the chance to say those things that you have to say. And I guess in a sense, my view is that the most important thing, the most important person to say what you have to say to is first and foremost yourself, because only when you've said it to yourself and explored it would you be ready to take it out meaningfully to the rest of the world. So I'm quite interested that you journaled since you were 9 before you started blogging in, when was it, 2004?
Yes, you actually did a lot of research about me. Yes. I started blogging in 2004, and that's when WordPress started. So that's exactly what you said, that you just have to write for yourself first, because you won't have to worry about everyone judging you. And that's how I started when I was using WordPress as, you know, a blogging software. I just became a personal blogger. So it's just a space for me to share my thoughts about politics. You know, when I was younger, I was kind of interested in politics. So that's how it started. And then eventually, when I was in my 20s, I was traveling on my own in Southeast Asia. And so I set up a travel blog. And then eventually I changed to blogging about mental health and wellness, and that's Cypress. Yeah, so you're quite right. As soon as you gain more confidence about, you know, conveying what you wanted to, you just move from one niche to another.
Yeah.
So when we blog, it's a lot easy. I'm sorry, when we keep a journal, it's a lot easier because we're just writing for ourselves. But you also do another type of writing, which is poetry, and poetry is meant to be read by someone else. So that's on another level. And we talked about earlier about clear, straightforward kind of communication, but sometimes poetry is like the epitome of obscurity and, you know, ambiguousness. So how do you reconcile that with your message earlier that we have to be more, we don't have to abuse the language?
Yeah. Isn't that interesting? Yeah, that people perceive poetry as being difficult. And here's you and I both agreeing that words are fabulously powerful, and the easier, the more accessible you make those words, the better it is for other people. And then here's me describing myself as a poet, and people say, crikey, poetry is complicated and difficult and highbrow and toffee-nosed, and who wants to get into that? Well, it isn't. Poetry is about distilling words to be their most powerful, to join words together in a way that makes use of their sound, their resonance, their meaning, put all of those together and refine and refine and refine until you get the most succinct form of expression that you possibly can. What you discover, the magic of poetry, and I'll give some examples in a minute if you like, but the magic of poetry is that you find that when writing it, it has a life of its own. That somehow as the poet, you start off writing, but the poem itself begins to take over. And in taking over, it takes you to places you didn't even know about yourself. And so when you end up having refined and finished the poem and reading it, sometimes it's as if it's been written by somebody else, and it tells you things about yourself that you didn't know when you started writing it. And if it's absolutely brilliantly magical, and I don't claim this for the stuff that I do, but certainly it is for other good poets, that poetry really works when it tells other people who haven't written it something not only about the person who has written it and the experiences they've had, but it tells them something, it tells the reader something new about the reader too. And that's when poetry really connects.
But when it comes to starting with poetry, how do you start, Hugh? Where does the inspiration come from?
Well, the inspiration, I mean, from anywhere really. Shall I give you a couple of examples?
Sure.
Try and race through some examples. I'd love to go back at some stage and talk about the rules. If anybody wanted to start doing a journal, you and I both will have ideas about how you do it and what rules you might set for yourself. And I'd love to go back and just cover that sometime if we get a minute. But yeah, I mean, let's take then the very simplest of poems. Here's a poem, so just so that people don't think poetry has to be really complicated and highbrow. Here's a poem I wrote when I was 17. I was in the Lake District. It was the end of a day. I'd been staying there with friends. I was deeply, deeply depressed in a way that, you know, anybody who remembers being a teenager will perhaps recall you can be. And I was sitting on a jetty, dangling my feet into the waters of Windermere, and out in front of me, an otherwise blank scene, there was a little island. And so I wrote a poem called Island, and it just goes like this. The day ends with an island, lonely, holding no promise of Crusoes or maidens, just an island, nothing else, nothing. Now, as I say, hugely adolescent, but where does the inspiration comes from? It comes from just seeing an island and thinking, there's an island. But then thinking, now, how does that relate to me? I'm not even thinking, how does that relate to me? Suddenly, this physical thing that's an island is now me. The island, I say, is lonely, but it isn't the island that's lonely. It's me that is. The island holds no promise of Crusoes or maidens. There's no romance. There's none of that adventure storybook. It is just an island, nothing else, nothing. And that's a poem, because what it does is it encapsulates a moment. It takes something that's out there, and in this case, visual, and it turns it into something that is mental and spiritual. And what I find interesting about that is it's not a great poem. I'm not setting it up as a great poem, but it's still there. And now, 51 years on, I can still see exactly where I am. More than that, I can feel exactly how I felt. And in fact, in 2018, I went back and wrote another poem called Island Revisited, where I explored from the point of view of me now, who that boy was and how I coped with living with him for the next 50 years. I won't read you that one because it's long and a bit more complicated. But yeah. So there's the idea. It's just like, can I do you one more idea?
Yeah, sure. You were talking earlier about journaling. If you could just go back to that.
Okay. Yeah, do you want me just to nip back there? Because I jotted down, I thought, what I'd love from this is for people who are listening, who haven't got the confidence to go out there and blog, to actually say, well, okay, I can write a journal. I'll set aside the time and I'll do that. And if they do, I promise them that they will find their life changes as a result. So here's my rules, my simple rules. Try to write something every day. But if you can't do it, don't beat yourself up. Don't just list what you've done. I got up, then I had breakfast, then I went to work, because that's a diary. What you need to do is pick out a little cameo, something that happened during the day, and describe it and explore how you felt about it and see where that takes you. So you're not trying to list everything that happened in the day. You're trying to pick out something that was significant in some way during the day, and then you're going to explore your feelings around it. I can give you an example if you like, but we might be tight for time. Write in the present tense if you can. You want to write as if you're in the moment. Ask yourself questions, reflect, answer the questions you ask yourself about what you've seen or what you've done in the most honest way you can. Because remember, you're the only person that's ever going to read this. It doesn't have to it doesn't need to be a great literary work. You're the only one that's ever going to see it. So you can be absolutely honest. Don't be self-conscious. Just be honest. Never go back and alter what you've written. You can't rewrite history. That was how you felt when you wrote it. If you look at it the next day and you don't like it, comment on not liking it today, but don't alter what you said yesterday. I let myself make comments on world events just to give a context for what's happening in my life, and I find that quite helpful. But then, when you've done that, go back and read it later. Read what you wrote a week ago, or a month ago, or 6 months ago. And I promise you, you'll absolutely surprise yourself, and you'll get to understand who you are much better. You'll get to see the real you. It's absolutely amazing. It is almost like magic. And I promise, first day, you'll be great at it. By day 3, it'll feel like a bit of a chore, but persevere, because by day 12, you'll be loving it. And by day 30, you'll be absolutely addicted. because it won't just be a journal. It'll be a friend, it'll be a confidant, it'll be a confessional priest, it'll be your own therapist. Honestly, I can't recommend it highly enough. Please, if you're out there listening and you haven't done it yet, get out there and do it. Give it a month. Anyway, sorry, we wandered away from poetry.
No, that's definitely fine, Hugh, and thanks for sharing your thoughts on how we could actually improve our writing and also how to be more comfortable with writing. And just on the subject of keeping a journal, it's actually not just for you. Who knows? Someone might be able to access your journal once you're gone. Just as an example, I actually read Joe Orton's diary a few years ago. Just for context, Joe Orton is an English playwright during the 60s, and he tragically died in, I think, before 70s, the later part of 60s. And some of his friends and relatives decided to publish his diary, and you can just see his writing style and actually what happened with his life. And so, it actually serves another purpose, not just for himself, just to chronicle his life, but also just to inspire other people. So it's not just for you. But
I think that's a really good point. Can I just chip in?
Yeah,
I think that's a really good point. But the important thing was Joe Orton wrote his journal for himself.
Yes.
Where I get suspicious are people like Matt Hancock, who write a diary in order to demonstrate how great they've been. Because they're consciously writing a diary for other people. Yeah. And so, by all means, somebody when you've gone might read your diary if you permit them to. But as long as you've written it first for yourself, I think that's the important thing. Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, that's fine. But just to go back to poetry earlier, and thank you for kindly reading your poetry. What else do you focus on? Do you just focus on your nature, or nature, or you're traveling, or is it more of an introspection activity?
That's a really good question. I've got a note here because somebody reviewed some of my poetry recently, and they gave it a description. Which I can't find at the moment, but it hit the nail absolutely on the head. Here we are. Existentialist, the human voice, contrasted with nature sublime, a human struggle unresolved, but soothed by nature. And I thought, that's probably about it. Of course, when you're writing poetry, because you're exploring your own mind, then it can tend to be quite introspective. I'll read you one in a moment and talk to you about it. That is quite introspective, but quite often that's sparked by something external that then gives you the chance to get inside your own head and see what it is that's troubling you. You'll gather from me talking about when I was 17 that I have in the past suffered from depression, and that's such a debilitating experience. And I'm sure I'm not alone in having that experience and wondering how to deal with it. And certainly writing a journal has helped me deal with it. But more than that, poetry has, because poetry gives you the chance to deeply reflect. And the very act of writing down those words, I write down in pencil. Let me show you if I can find one of my, here's one of my poetry notebooks, and so that way on, and it's a little black book where all the ideas go in first, and I write in pencil, and I write in very small writing when I start, but it's to do with somehow your brain behaving differently when you're writing than when you're just talking, and it's a slower processing. You might know the psychological difference between writing and reading. I don't. I just know that it is the case. But shall I give you another example of a slightly more complicated?
Absolutely, Hugh.
Yeah. Okay. So my daughter has one of my daughters. Both my daughters have dogs. One of my daughters, Sophie, has a black Labrador called Bagheera, and Bagheera is so jet black that when you try and photograph him, he disappears. there's just a black hole in the shape of a dog where the dog should be. And I was really struck by this. And I'd seen a picture of Bargira on the beach, and I thought about this idea of black dog. But of course, anybody who's been depressed knows that black dog is also the description for how you feel when depression hits you. And so I started writing a poem which was based on me just picking descriptions of what the black dog looked like. And interestingly, this one came to me each night before I went to bed, or as I went to bed. I put my head on the pillow and I pictured Bargira, and I came up with a description, black dog. And then the next night, as I went to sleep, another image, liquid silhouette. So I wrote that down. And the next night, I put my head on the pillow, viscous shadow. So I wrote that down, and it was after that that the poem came. And the poem starts being a description of the dog, and it ends being something else. Let me try it on you. Black dog, liquid silhouette, viscous shadow, apparitional chic, whose shape materializes from darkness only when the light from some random street lamp or the moon ripples silver on its undulating silken sheen. Don't confuse me, his doleful eyes implore, with that other beast which hounds and gnaws at souls. I reach down, deep to stroke the lustrous coat, take comfort from its soft, familiar touch, its pungent warmth, the smell, the taste of dust, or some pain caressed beneath the sacred folds of flesh. So what starts as a description of a dog has the dog talking back to me saying, hey, yeah, I'm a dog, but don't confuse me with that other black dog. And then I find myself touching the dog and sensing the dog and holding on to it. I'm taking comfort from it. And what I realize is, as people who get depressed sometimes do, that I'm taking comfort from the fact that I'm depressed, that there is a familiarity about it that I am embracing and caressing. Now, when I started thinking about Bargira the dog, the poem was going to take me, but it did. That one, by the way, is up on my poetry website if anybody wants to see that. Maybe you'll put a link up later and people can have a look if they want. But I've put half a dozen or so poems up there just in case people wanted to see the shape of what I do. It doesn't all have to be miserable, by the way, Dennis. What we haven't got to yet, and I'd love to talk, well, I'd love you to talk more about, is this idea of resilience. Because you're all about seeing the positive, and here's me doing two very depressive poems. But actually, my view is resilience has to come on the platform of self-understanding. So until you've explored what it is that makes you how you are, it's hard to build that resilience. Am I barking up the wrong tree there? You're
absolutely right. And it's not actually depressive because it's more, I suppose it's more cathartic. It kind of relates to what James Baker, the psychologist who studied about expressive writing in the 80s. That's what he calls, expressive writing. It's actually a way for you to deal with your past trauma, to deal with your emotions. And ultimately, that's what the purpose of writing, to reconcile what we've experienced and also what we're currently feeling at the moment. And yes, I'm currently doing a research, which is a bit wishy-washy at the moment. So I'm looking for ways on how we could use blogs to improve resilience of young people. Right. So because, there's this space called the internet where most young people inhabit. And so I want to use that as a space to cultivate their resilience. My work is a bit theoretical at the moment, but I'm looking for practical ways on how we could actually do it. So yeah, hopefully I'm on my third year now. Hopefully in the next 3 more years, I could finally find something, practical on how to do it. But just to go back to your writing, you seem to be, you know, fluid with words. You're comfortable with it. But I was just wondering, is writer's block real? And would you say that's the most challenging thing about being a writer? Writer's block.
But no, no, I wouldn't really. I'm not quite sure what writer's block is. Of course, we all have days where we feel it's hard to get words down on paper, and we find ways of absolutely avoiding doing it. We go and we seek out every bit of filing that needs doing, and every phone call that needs to be made in order not to sit down and write. I'm in the fortunate position that now I don't have to write for a living. When I had to write for a living, you couldn't have writer's block. Copy needed to be written, and so you just had to write it. And you just got on with it. And what I would say to anybody who thinks they're struggling to write and they're looking at a blank sheet of paper is just write down what's in your head. Just start putting words on paper, and it might be absolute rubbish, and you might have to screw it up and throw it away and start again. I'm sure any writer will tell you that the corner of their writing room is absolutely piled high with screwed up balls of paper. But just start writing, and that very act of letting the imagination flow down your arm and through that pen or through that pencil. Or onto that keyboard, as your generation will do, is going to get you going. It's going to release that potential. Don't be put off by it. Don't let yourself believe that you can't do it. I think the message I'd like people to take away, apart from hearing a slightly jollier poem from me, so they don't think I'm total misery, is that honestly, anybody can do this. All you need to do is sit and look around you and latch onto something that interests you and start writing what you see, what you hear, what you feel, and you'll find that the words just flow, and you'll end up with something that may not be a fabulous work of art, but something that with refinement can shape into something that will tell you something about yourself that you didn't know previously. I just get so excited by the alchemy power of words, to turn just words into precious gems. And that's what I think writing does. And writing does it more than talking does it. Hey, and I'm preaching to the converted when I'm talking to you, because it's changed your life. Can I do you a cheery poem?
Yes, please.
A happier one. Because I don't know how long we've got, but I'd hate to miss out on something.
No, we still got more time. So yeah, please read out your poem. Okay,
let me try this then. Anything can inspire you. Here's a simple thing that inspired me. I was on a lounger in the lawn, on the lawn at my house at home, and I was beginning to feel that black dog was approaching me, and I didn't want that to be. The case. My wife walked past me, and as she walked past me, she just gently brushed me, and then her fingers intertwined with mine. And there were three things that happened. There was a touch, there was a word, there was a glance. And those three things just changed the way I view the world. And I wanted to capture them. So I call it the intimacy of small kindnesses. Soft as white butterflies' rose-petaled wings, your kindness eddies in the summer stillness, stirs translucent leaves on wilting branches, soothes. Such gentleness, where one kind touch can brush like feathered down across an outstretched arm, or interweave a tapestry of fingers, its tenderness, its strength. In one kind word, treasured like a gemstone, placed meticulously with care, bejeweled, its gentle weight, its lightness, out of which its passionate radiance shines. And from your eyes, a vibrant kindling flame, light, igniting a connection, coaxing heart into a wearied soul, a faltering lifeline sparked. Together, one, never strangers, held eternal in the momentary, timeless bond of touching kindred souls. Right here, in all these things, your love sustains me.
Thank you, Hugh. Those are really lovely pieces of poems, and thank you for sharing that. You just actually demonstrated that poems don't have to have rhyme or structure. I think gone are the days that we're reading works during the Victorian times where they really have to sort of have a rhyming structure. So you can see that it's more free flowing now. And I think that's the power of words, like it matches the time and the era when it was written. But Hugh, we're already approaching towards the end of this conversation, and we heard some of your work, and you also give us some tips about writing. But I'd like to wrap this up by hearing more of you as a person rather than as a writer. So I have some quick fire questions for you.
Fire away.
The first one is, what were you afraid of as a child?
I think I was probably afraid of disapproval.
Mm-hmm. And what is your favorite word in another language?
Oh. I'm tempted to say Schadenfreude, but I'd probably better not.
Okay. And if you were, Schadenfreude is a German word, like I don't know how to say in English.
It's taking pleasure in other people's misfortune. So yes. No, I shouldn't do that. If serendipity was a foreign word, I would choose that.
Serendipity, Schadenfreude. If you weren't a writer, what would you have pursued in life?
There are two things I would like to have been. I would love to have been a wildlife photographer because it absolutely would have taught me the art of patience. It took me so long to realize that instead of chasing after what it is you think you want, if you sit there and look around you, you will see the beauty that's there. And I can't believe how I managed to get so far through life before I realized that. And it was bird watching that taught me that. I just to sit and think there is no bird life here, and to wait 5 minutes and it's all around you. And it is just learning the art of patience. That, and I'd also like to have been a horologist. I love taking clocks apart and putting them back together to discover that I'm not actually the least practical man in the world.
Oh, that's it. That's interesting. And Hugh, finally, the floor is all yours. What should people take away from today's conversation? You gave us lots of nuggets of information when it comes to writing, but just to kind of sum it up. And also, what's next for you? I understand you have an upcoming website.
That's right. Yes. Well, what would I have people take away? I guess I grew up in a generation where men held their feelings to themselves. You were encouraged to man up and not show your emotions. Your life's work, I guess, is about helping people to come to terms with that. I think what I'd like to say is, even if you're not ready to share how you feel with other people, it's really important that you share how you feel with yourself. And I come back to my same old boring theme. Words are the way to do that. And writing words is the way to do that. And writing words just for yourself and not for anybody else. You can share them with people later, but use the power of words to help you understand first yourself and then the world. So if there's anything for people to take away, it is get writing. Start writing that journal. Persevere with it. And don't be afraid of poetry. It doesn't have to be Wordsworth or Shelley or Keats. As you said, it can be free form. It just needs to explore. And by exploring, you get to understand. What's next for me? Well, yes, I don't share my poetry much, and obviously I don't share my journal at all. But I have just launched a very, very simple website so that if people want to see my poetry, they can. It's called HughVenablesPoetry.com. And there's, I don't know, nearly a dozen poems up there for starters. I will add more to it. And the scope for people to comment if they wish to. So I'd love to hear people's thoughts, views, questions, comments. HughVenablesPoetry.com.
Well, thank you, Hugh. It's a lovely conversation with you. And yes, you're absolutely right that sometimes you just have to write for yourself. You know, you don't have to tweet about it. You don't have to post it on Facebook. Ultimately, it's a personal process. But we leave it there, Hugh. Hugh Venables, writer and poet. It's great to have you here on the DRH show. And as usual, all the links will be on the description note. Great to have you, Hugh.
Dennis, thank you so much for having me, and keep up the good work. Really appreciated talking with you. Thanks again.